Go then, you'll be back. Severin Drakos said it the way he said everything that mattered, quietly, without turning from the window, as if her leaving were a small weather that would pass before dawn. Narina stood in the doorway of a bedroom that had never felt like hers. One hand pressed flat against the curve where their child had begun to grow, and understood that he believed it. He believed it the way other men believed in gravity. Everyone came back to Severin Drakos. The city bent toward him. Frightened men lowered their voices around his name. Nothing he wanted had ever walked out a door and stayed gone. She did not argue. Arguing was a thing you did when you still hoped to be heard. By the time the sky turned the color of cold iron, she was gone. No cases dragged down the stairs. No note. Only one thing waited for him on the black glass table where he took his coffee at first light. Her wedding ring, set down without a sound, catching the gray morning like a small closed eye. Severin Drakos had told his pregnant wife she would be back by morning. By morning, the only thing that had come back to the table was her ring. To understand how a woman walks away from the most feared man in the harbor, you have to go back to the day she first agreed to belong to him. Narina had not been raised to be brave. She had been raised to be careful. Her father, Gideon Ward, had run a shipping office on the North Quay and a household on the same principle, which was that affection was a wage you earned and could lose. He had a phrase for her whenever she reached past the edges he had drawn. "You will be back." He said it when she took the job at the auction house against his wishes. He said it when she moved into a rented room above a chandlery with a window that let in the smell of salt and rope. "You will be back," he told her, "because girls like you cannot manage the world alone." For a long time she had believed him, the way you believe anything said often enough by someone whose approval you still want. She met Severin at the auction house, across a table of old sea instruments, brass compasses and sextants that had once guided ships and now sat quiet under glass. He did not haggle. He asked her questions. What did she love about the astrolabe in the third case? Why did she think the widow who had brought it in waited 40 years to sell it? He listened as though her answers were rearranging something inside him. No one had ever listened to her like that. She mistook the attention for a door opening. It was a door. She had simply not yet learned which way it swung. They married in the spring, in the chapel on the cliff above his estate, with the sea lying flat and bright below them. For 1 year she was happy, or close enough that she stopped searching for the difference. Then, the world her husband lived in began to press its weight against the walls of the house, and she watched him harden the way wet clay hardens, from the outside in. She learned the rules by breaking them. She learned not to ask who the men in the courtyard were, or why some of them never came a second time. She learned that a closed study door meant closed, that certain telephone calls emptied his eyes of everything she loved in them, that the estate had rooms she was not to enter and names she was not to say. The house was called Rel House, a great pale stone thing on the headland with more windows than warmth, run by a housekeeper named Perla, who had served the family since Severin was a boy, and who watched Narina with a pity she was too proud to accept. The city knew him only as Dracos, and the name did the work of a loaded weapon. His right hand, a lean and watchful man called Emmerich, moved through the house like a second shadow. And there was Ottavia San, who had grown up beside Severin, who wore the estate like a coat she expected to inherit, and who had never once looked at Narina without quietly measuring how long she would last. "You are a soft thing in a hard house," Ottavia told her once, smiling. "Soft things do not last here. They get used up, or they get sent away." Narina had said nothing. She had learned that too, how silence could be mistaken for weakness by people who had never needed it to survive. What none of them knew, what Severin himself did not know until it was already breaking them, was that the soft thing in the hard house had begun, very quietly, to read the house itself. In the second year, he stopped seeing her. Not cruelly. Cruelty would have been easier to name. He simply began treating her presence the way a busy man treats a lamp left burning in another room, aware of it faintly, and never enough to cross the distance toward it. He came home later. He spoke to Emmerich in the low voice he had once saved only for her. When she tried to reach him, he handled her, the way he handled everyone, with control dressed up as care. He bought her things she had not asked for and could not refuse. He arranged her days. He decided, gently and completely, what was good for her, and he called it love, and for a while so did she. Then, in the gray middle of that second winter, she learned she was carrying his child. She had meant to tell him at once. She had rehearsed it a dozen ways, but every version of the telling ran into the same wall, which was the fear that a child would become one more thing for him to manage, one more reason to fold her smaller, one more door he would decide she could not walk through. So she waited. She was still waiting on the night it all came apart, 3 weeks after the little clinic on Harrow Street had confirmed what her body already knew, when she walked into his study to try, one last time, to be heard, and found him already deciding her future without her in the room. "You will be safer away from all of this for a while," he had said, not looking up from his papers. "I have taken a house in the hills. You leave in the morning." She had asked him for one simple thing. She had asked to be part of the choice. And Severin Dracos, the man the whole harbor obeyed, had finally looked at her and looked at her exactly the way her father used to, and said the words that finished it. "Go then, you'll be back." By 7 that morning the house already knew. The servants moved differently, the way a room moves when something has broken that no one is permitted to name aloud. Perla found the ring first, and did not touch it. She only stood over the black glass table with her hands folded, and when Severin came down, she stepped aside without a word. He looked at the ring for a long time. He did not pick it up. "Bring her back," he said to Emmerich. "She keeps a room above a chandlery on the North Quay. She goes there when she wants to feel poor. Bring her home before noon." Emmerich had worked for Severin Dracos for 11 years, and in that time he had learned to hear the things his employer did not say. What he heard now, beneath the flat command, was a man who had never once seriously imagined the sentence might not work. He found Narina exactly where Severin said she would be. Nothing else was as Severin had promised. She was not weeping. She was not folding clothes to carry home. She sat at a small table by the window with a pot of tea and a stack of papers, and she was working, her pen moving steadily down a column of figures with the calm of a woman who had done this many times before. She did not look surprised to see him standing in her doorway. "He said you would send someone," she said. He was right about that much. Emmerich had come prepared for tears. He had come prepared for pleading, for the soft wife the house had trained him to expect. He had not come prepared for this. "Come home," he tried. "Whatever happened last night, most of it can still be undone." "Some things," she agreed. "Not this one." Then she did something that would keep Emmerich awake long into that night. She turned the top page toward him and laid one finger against a line of numbers. "Tell me," she said, "in the timber accounts for the yard on Kessler Street, how much does the estate pay for a single shipment of oak?" Emmerich did not know. It had never been his part of the work. "It pays twice," she said quietly. "It has paid twice every month for the past 9 months. Once to the mill and once to an account that runs through a shell company in the Freeport and comes out clean in the hands of someone who eats at your table. I do not know his name. I know his handwriting. It is the same hand that signs the security roster for the East Gate." She said it the way another woman might have remarked on the rain. Emmerich felt the floor of his certainty tilt beneath him. "You are the wife," he said, before he could stop the words. "How could you possibly?" "I appraised forgeries for 6 years before I married him," she said. "A false ledger is only a forgery that believes it is safe. I have been reading this house since the second winter, because no one inside it would tell me anything, and a person learns to listen with her eyes when she is never allowed to ask questions. She folded the page once and held it out to him. "I am not coming back," she said. "But someone inside your gates has been selling my husband for the better part of a year, and whatever he decided about me in that study, I will not let our child grow up hearing that its father died because the soft thing in the hard house saw the knife and chose to say nothing. Give him this. Tell him it is the last thing I will ever hand him without being asked to." Emmerich took the page. It weighed nothing at all. It weighed more than anything he had ever carried. Behind him, out over the North Quay, the gulls turned and cried above the cold water. Nerina had already bent back over her figures, as though he had left the room the moment the page changed hands. When Emmerich set the folded page down on the black glass table beside the ring, Severin Dracos looked at the two things lying side by side. The ring he had been so certain would bring her running back to him. And the proof, written out in her careful and unhurried hand, that the wife he had spent 2 years dismissing as something ornamental had seen the single thing his most dangerous men had walked past every day for 9 months. For the first time in 11 years, Emmerich watched his employer go completely, dangerously still. Severin said one word. It was her name. Then he said, very softly, in a voice Emmerich had never heard him use in all those years, "Get me everything she has ever written down." Severin Dracos did not send Emmerich a second time. 2 days after the ring appeared on the table, he came to the room above the chandlery himself. Nerina heard the car before she saw it, the particular hush of an engine that cost more than the building it parked beside. She did not go to the window. She set a second cup on the table, because she had known, the moment the folded page left her hands, that a man like her husband could not leave a loose thread lying where he could see it. He would pull it. He would follow it straight back to her door. He filled the doorway the way he filled every room, and for a moment neither of them spoke. He looked at the narrow bed, the hot plate, the jar of sea glass on the sill that she had been filling one green and white piece at a time since she was a girl. He looked at all of it the way a man looks at a country he has heard described but never believed was real. "You could have telephoned," she said. "You do not answer," he said. "No." He set a leather case on the table. Inside were the ledgers, the real ones, the private books that never left the study that she had never once been allowed to touch in 2 years of marriage. He had carried them out of Rel House and across the harbor and laid them down in front of the wife he had told to go. "Show me," he said. And there it was, the thing she had not expected to feel, not triumph, something quieter and far more dangerous. He had come to the one table in the world where she was the authority and he was not. She should have made him wait. Instead, she sat and opened the first book and began. For the better part of an hour she walked him through it, and for the better part of an hour the most feared man in the harbor did not interrupt her once. Emmerich stood by the door and watched his employer sit like a student. She showed him how a clean account breathes, how honest money has a rhythm and a lie has a limp. She showed him the double payment, the mill on one line and the shell company on the next. The figures rounded a shade too smoothly, the way a forger rounds a signature he is copying instead of signing. She showed him the Freeport account and the 3 names it had worn in 9 months, each one shed like a coat the moment it grew warm. And then she turned the ledger sideways and set the security roster down beside it, and let him see the 2 hands for himself. The same narrow slant, the same short tail on the letter that ended each name. "Vidal," Severin said. It was not a question. His voice had gone very flat. "Your gate captain writes both," Nerina said. "The man who decides who comes through the east gate has been paid, twice a month, by people who want to know when that gate opens and closes, and for whom." She watched the knowledge move through him. Vidal had carried him out of a burning warehouse once. Vidal had stood at the foot of their wedding chapel. She had seen the photographs. Severin closed the book. "I want you back at the house by tonight," he said. behind the walls, with men I trust between you and anyone who. There are no men you trust, she said. That is the whole of what I just showed you. And I am not going back behind your walls. You would rather be here. He looked at the room, the hot plate, the single window over the alley, and could not keep the disbelief out of his voice. I would rather be somewhere I chose, she said. You have spent 2 years keeping me safe. You built the safest house on the headland, and you set me inside it, and you decided every single day which doors I was allowed to walk through. And it felt exactly like this room feels now, except that this room is mine. There is a difference between keeping a woman safe and keeping her, Severin. You built a wall around me and called it love because you have never once let yourself learn to give a person a door she is allowed to open herself. He was silent a long moment. Then, because he was who he was, he tried once more, gentler this time, which was somehow worse. Nerina, someone inside my own gate is selling me. You are carrying my child. Tell me how I am meant to sit across a harbor and do nothing. That is not what I asked of you, she said. I asked you to stop deciding what I am allowed to survive. And then, because he needed to see exactly what he was standing in the middle of, she turned to the last page she had marked, the one she had not shown Emmerich, the one she had sat with alone for 2 nights before she could sleep. There is one more thing, she said, and her calm cost her something now. For the first 8 months, the information they bought was yours. Your cars, your routes, the nights you slept at the house and the nights you did not. She laid one finger on a date. Then, 3 weeks ago, it changed. She moved her finger down the column. These payments are larger, and they are not buying your schedule anymore. Severin looked at the date. 3 weeks. The arithmetic reached his face before she said it aloud. They are buying mine, Nerina said quietly. Someone paid a great deal of money to learn exactly where your wife goes and when and how alone she is when she gets there. And it began 3 weeks before you stood in that study and told me I would be safer away from all of this. The room went very still. Down in the shop a bell rang as a customer came in, absurd and ordinary. You knew, she said. It was not quite an accusation. It was worse than that. It was a question she was already afraid to have answered. That night. You knew something was coming for me, did you not? Severin Dracos, who had an answer for everything, who had not been caught without one in 11 years, said nothing at all. He did not answer her that night. He left the ledgers behind, which told her more than any answer could have. A man like Severin never left his private books in another person's hands, unless he had decided that person was safer holding them than he was. But he came back the next evening, and the evening after that. He told himself and told her that it was the investigation. There were pages still to go through, a trail to follow deeper into the free port, and she was the only person alive who could read it. It was true, as far as it went. It simply did not explain why the harbor's most dangerous man kept arriving at a room above a chandlery a little after dark, or why he stayed long after the ledgers were closed for the night. She set the terms on the second evening before he could set them for her. I am not coming to the house, she said. I am not being moved to the hills, or a hotel, or a fortress you own under some other name. If you want me alive, you will keep me alive here, in the life I chose, where I can see my own door and open it myself. Then let me put 2 men on the key, he said. 1 man, she said, where I can see him. He does not follow me into the shops. He does not report my movements to anyone but you. And you do not use what he tells you to build a smaller and smaller circle around me until one morning I wake up living in a house again without ever having agreed to move. I have already lived that life once. I will not be walked back into it a second time and told it is for my own good. Severin looked at her for a long moment. You negotiate like someone who has read the other side's ledger. I have read yours, she said. He almost smiled. She watched him decide not to. 1 man, he agreed, and I come myself. That was not on the table. It is now. He said it quietly, without the old certainty, almost as though it were a question, and that small difference was the first thing in a long time that made her look at him twice. So he came. That became the shape of their days. A little after dark, she would hear the car on the quay, and then Fenna's voice below, and then the two-knuckle knock, and the room that had been entirely her own would hold two people again, though not in the old way. In the old way, he had entered rooms and rearranged them simply by standing inside them. Now he took the smaller chair without being told, and turned it so his back was never quite to the door, and worked whatever page she set in front of him until she said it was time for him to go. He always went when she said it. That, more than anything else, was the thing she kept turning over after he had left. The one man on the quay lasted a single morning before Fenna took charge of him. Fenna owned the chandlery below, a broad woman in her 60s with forearms like a docker and no fear whatsoever of anyone living, and she had decided some weeks earlier that Nerina was hers to look after. She fed the guard coffee, learned his mother's name, and by noon had him carrying crates as though he had been hired for the purpose. When Severin arrived that evening, she met him at the foot of the stairs with her arms folded. "So you are the husband," she said. She said the word husband the way another person might say leak or draft. "I am," Severin said. Fenna looked him up and down without hurry. "She is not a parcel to be signed for and stored. You leave her better than you found her, or you do not come up my stairs. Are we clear?" Behind him, Emmerich went carefully blank. No one spoke to Severin Dracos that way and simply carried on with their afternoon. Severin regarded the old woman for a moment. "Perfectly," he said, and something in the way he said it made Fenna grunt and stand aside. He learned things about his wife in those weeks that he had never troubled to learn in 2 years of marriage. He learned that she was ill in the evenings now, not the mornings, that the smell of the hot plate turned her stomach, that she pressed the back of her wrist to her mouth and breathed slowly until it passed and would not be helped while it was happening. The first time it took her in front of him, he stood up so fast he knocked the chair over and then simply stood there, the man who could empty a room with a telephone call, entirely without instruction, holding a glass of water she had not asked for. "Sit down," she told him from the sink. "This is the one thing you cannot manage for me." He sat. He hated it. She could see how much. Later, when she opened the ledger to work, a small square of paper slipped from between the pages. He caught it before she could. It was the gray and silver picture from the clinic on Harrow Street, the one she used to hold her place, a smudged and secret thing that was their child. He looked at it far too long. "You use it as a bookmark," he said. "It keeps my place," she said. It seemed right, that it would keep my place in the book that finally told me the truth about your house. He set it back down on the table very gently, the way he had set nothing down gently in 2 years, and he did not try to keep it, and she understood that he was learning badly and late, that there were things in the world he was not permitted to pick up and carry off. He began, without either of them naming it, to knock. He had never knocked on a door in his life. Doors opened for Severin Dracos. But he began to stop at the top of the chandlery stairs and rap twice with one knuckle and wait, truly wait, until she said, "Come in." The first time he did it, she stood in the middle of the room with her hand flat on the ledger and felt something turn over in her chest that she did not want to feel, because she knew exactly how far a man could travel in the space of one small knock and how much farther he might still have to go. She did not tell him she had noticed. She was not ready to be a woman who noticed things like that about Severin Dracos again. She might have let herself begin to hope, if not for the sea glass. She kept the jar on the sill and filled it a little higher each week, green and white and the rare soft blue, worn smooth by a sea that took the sharp edges off everything if you gave it long enough. She counted the pieces sometimes without meaning to, the way she counted everything. So she knew, the evening she climbed the stairs alone and stopped in her own doorway with the new key still in her hand, that there was one piece too many in the room. A single shard of glass sat on the sill beside the jar. A deep red. She had never in her life picked up a red piece. Red glass did not wash up on that key. Someone had stood in the room that was hers, the one place in the world she had chosen for herself, and set it there where she could not fail to see it, and locked the new door quietly behind them on the way out. He did not raise his voice when she showed him the red glass. That was how she knew how frightened he was. She had braced for the old Severin, the one who would already be on the telephone arranging a house in the hills while she stood in the ruin of her own safety with nothing to say that he would hear. She watched him look at the red shard for a long time, his jaw working, the fear coming off him like cold off a winter window. And then he did the hardest thing she had ever watched him do. He turned to her, and he asked a question. "What you want to do?" he said. For a moment she could not answer, because in 2 years of marriage he had never once arranged those 5 words in that order and meant them. "What do you want?" had always been the opening of a sentence that ended with him explaining kindly why she could not have it. "I want to change the lock again," she said slowly, testing the ground beneath her. "Tonight. A lock I choose, that I fit myself, that no one who has ever set foot in your house has seen. I want your man at the foot of the stairs and not one step higher, and I want to stay." Every part of him strained against the last 3 words. She could see the effort it took him to hold still. "Someone walked into the room where you sleep," he said. "Yes," she said. "And if I run from the first room I have ever chosen, then the person who left that glass has already taken it from me, and they did not even have to touch me to do it. I will not hand them my door. I will change the lock." He was quiet a long moment. Then he took off his coat, rolled his sleeves to the elbow, and said, "Then show me the lock. Tell me what to do. I have never fitted one in my life." And that was how Severin Dracos came to be kneeling on the floor of a rented room a little after midnight, holding a small torch between his teeth while his estranged wife talked him through the seating of a deadbolt. The 2 of them careful not to touch. The red shard sealed in an envelope on the table between them like a held breath. After that the evenings changed, though neither of them could have said precisely when. They still worked the ledgers. The trail ran deeper into the Freeport than she had first believed, through 3 shell companies, and a freight line and a bank that asked no questions, and untangling it was slow and exact and suited to her particular patience. But somewhere in the long hours, a second conversation began to run beneath the first, the way a tide runs under the skin of a flat sea. He asked her one night why she had loved the auction house. She told him it was the only place her father's voice had ever gone quiet, that she could hold a thing made 200 years before by a person long dead and know, from the wear of it, what its owner had loved and neglected and feared, that objects did not lie the way people did, and that being trusted to say what a thing truly was had felt, for the first time in her life, like being trusted at all. He listened the way he had listened across that table of brass compasses 3 years before, and she remembered with an ache she resented that this was the man she had married, not the name the harbor feared. This one, the one who went still and let her fill the silence instead of filling it for her. She asked him things too and was surprised more than once when he answered. He told her on a rainy night that he had not been born to any of it, that the harbor had made him into the thing it needed, and then learned to fear what it had made. He told her there had been an older brother once who was never spoken of at Rell House, and then he stopped in a way that told her the rest of that story was a room he was not ready to open. She did not push the door. She of all people knew what it cost to be pushed through a door before you were ready to walk through it. He noticed the jar of sea glass filling on the sill and asked her what it was for. "It is not for anything," she said, which was not true. And he knew it was not true, and for once he waited instead of pressing. So she told him. "When it is full," she said, "I am going to open a room of my own. A small one. A place where people bring me the things they have inherited and cannot understand, and I tell them what they are, and what they are worth, and whether to keep them or let them go. My own name over the door. No one else's. The next evening he arrived with a case, not the ledgers. A flat wooden case, old, its brass corners worn soft with handling. He set it on the table and opened it, and inside, on a bed of faded velvet, lay the astrolabe from the third case at the auction house, the one she had loved, the one the widow had waited 40 years to sell. I bought it the day after we met, he said. I have never known what to do with it, I thought. Take it back, she said gently. His face closed a fraction. It is a gift. It is beautiful, she said. And it is the most thoughtful thing you have ever tried to hand me. And if I take it, then the shop with my name over the door begins with a thing you bought me. And one day when we are arguing, you will remember that you gave it to me. And you will be right. And I cannot let you be right about that. Do you see it? The jar has to fill on its own. That is the entire point of the jar. She watched him understand it. It was slow, and it plainly hurt, and he did it anyway. He closed the case. He did not take the astrolabe out of her life, but he did not leave it inside it either. He set it on the high shelf beside the door, where it belonged to neither of them, and he said, "Then it will wait up there, like the lock, until the day you decide you want it." Something was happening between them that had never once happened while they were married, which was that they were becoming slowly and against every habit either of them owned, honest with each other. She was aware of it as a danger greater than the red glass. A man could break into her room and she would only change the lock. She did not know what she was meant to change to keep out the way he now waited at the top of her stairs, or the fact that she had begun, some evenings, to set the second cup on the table before she ever heard him knock. Then, on a bright cold afternoon while Severin was across the harbor and the guard had gone with him, a different car stopped on the quay. Nerina looked down from her window and felt the old cold begin to climb her spine. Ottavia-san stepped out onto the cobbles in pale grey, looked up at the chandlery with an expression of faint distaste, and began, unhurried, to climb the stairs. "He tells you it is about the ledgers," Ottavia said from the doorway, "not troubling with hello. That is how he tells it to himself as well, I expect." She smiled. "But you have not asked yourself the one useful question, have you? You have not asked how Severin Drakos knew, 3 full weeks before you walked out, that his own house was no longer safe for you, and why, knowing it, he said nothing to you at all except go." Nerina did not invite her in. Ottavia came in regardless, the way people who have never once been refused move through the world, and stood in the middle of the small room looking at the narrow bed and the hot plate and the jar of sea glass as though pricing a life she intended to end. "You have done well for yourself," Ottavia said, "for a woman who ran." "I did not run," Nerina said. "I left." "There is a difference, though I would not expect you to have needed it." Ottavia smiled and walked a slow circle. "He is with you every evening now," she said. "Emmerich tells things to Perla, and Perla tells me, because Perla has served that family since before you were a thought, and she knows which way the wind has always blown at Rel House. It blows toward me, in the end. It always has." "You came a long way down from the headland to tell me the weather," Nerina said. "You could have telephoned it in." "Some things a person prefers to deliver in the room," Ottavia said, "so that she can watch the face." She let her gaze fall, unhurried and deliberate, to the low curve beneath Nerina's dress. "You are further along than the house realizes. He does not know quite how far, does he? You have not told him. Clever. A child is the largest door of all. I would not hand him that key either, in your place." "Then why are you here?" Nerina said, though her heart had begun to beat against the wall of her chest. "Because you are clever," Ottavia said, "and clever is the one thing that survives in that house, and I would hate to see it wasted. So I will do you a kindness no one else will." She stopped by the window. Ask your husband how he came to know there was a knife pointed at you 3 weeks before you left him. Ask him who carried him that warning. And when he will not answer, and he will not, ask yourself why a man who claims to love you would rather send you into the dark than tell you the truth standing in the light. Narina held very still. There was a thing wrong in what Ottavia had said, and her mind, which never stopped counting, had already caught it and begun to turn it over. You seem very certain there was a knife, Narina said. Everyone in that world lives with a knife somewhere, Ottavia said. It is hardly a remarkable guess. But you knew where mine was pointed, Narina thought. You knew it was pointed at me. And when? And she remembered the red shard of glass on her sill, the room that had been entered and locked again from the inside, and she looked at Ottavia Sarnes standing beside that same window in pale gray, and something cold and clear settled over her, the same clarity she felt over a ledger the moment the false line finally showed itself. She said none of it. She had learned long ago that the most dangerous thing a watched woman can do is let herself be seen understanding. You have said your kindness, Narina said. You can go. Ottavia went. At the door she paused. He will choose the house, she said. In the end, he always chooses the house. When he does, remember that I told you first. That evening Narina asked him. She waited until the ledgers were closed and the tea had gone cold, and then she said, without lifting her eyes from the page, 3 weeks before you told me to go, someone warned you there was a threat to me. Did they? Severin went still in the way that was its own answer. Who told you that? He said. Answer me first. He was quiet a moment. Yes, he said. Someone I have trusted a long time brought me word that a rival meant to reach me through you. And your answer, Narina said, was to stand in your study and tell your pregnant wife to leave, and let her believe you had stopped wanting her. I needed you gone from that house, he said, and the control cracked at last. I have learned, in a life you have never had to live, that the surest way to keep a person out of reach is to make them stop being yours. If you left angry, you would go far, and stay gone, and be alive. That was the only arithmetic that has ever kept anyone I. He stopped. Anyone you what? She said gently. He did not finish it. Who warned you? She said. Give me the name. That I will not tell you, he said, because you would go and look at that person the way you look at a false ledger, and I cannot have you doing that. Not with this one. Even now, she said, you decide which truths I am strong enough to hold. He had no answer that was not the same answer. And she saw, in the set of his shoulders, that he believed the silence was a kindness. That was the thing in him she could never reach, the place where his love and his fear had grown into each other so long ago that he could no longer tell which of the two was holding the knife. She did not sleep well after he left. Some hour past midnight, she woke to Fenna's voice in the stairwell, sharp and frightened, calling her name. The key guard lay at the foot of the chandlery steps, breathing but not waking, a swelling darkening at his temple. And when Narina climbed back to her own room, to the door she had locked with her own hand, she found it locked still, exactly as she had left it, and on her pillow, set down with terrible care, in the center of the smooth cotton, the small gray and silver picture from the Harrow Street Clinic. They had taken it from between the pages of the ledger. They had passed through a locked door to lay her unborn child on her pillow like a promise, and beneath it, in a narrow slant she had seen once before on a security roster, 3 words. We know too. She stood a long time with the picture held in her 2 hands, and the fear in her went through its old changes, cold and then colder, and then, at the very bottom of it, in the place where Ottavia and her father and every watching room had never once thought to look, it turned into something with edges. She did not weep. She counted. Then she went to wake Fenna and to begin in the dark to make a plan. Severin came before dawn. He did not knock. It was the only time he ever forgot to, and she forgave him for it before he reached the top of the stairs, because his face, when he came through the door, was a face she had never seen him wear, stripped all the way down to the boy underneath the name. He read the 3 words. He held the little picture as though it might dissolve. And then, sitting on the floor of her room with his back against the bed and the grey light coming up over the alley, Severin Dracos finally opened the door he had kept shut against her for 2 years. "I had a brother," he said. "Anselm. He was older. When our father died and left us to the harbor, I was 17 and Anselm was 20, and he was the better of us in every way the world does not reward. Gentle, slow to anger. He wanted to leave all of it, the boats and the debts and the men who came to collect them, and begin again somewhere the name Dracos meant nothing. I told him to wait. I told him I would make us safe first, and then we would go together." He turned the picture over in his hands. "The men our father owed decided the fastest way to move me was through him. They never once touched me. They took Anselm, and they let me know they had him. And for 11 days I did everything a person can do. And it was not enough. And at the end of the 11 days they gave him back to me in a way I will not describe to you. And I understood the lesson they had spent 11 days teaching, that everything I loved was a door into me, that the softest thing I owned was the place the knife would always go." He said it without heat, the way a man reports a fact he has carried so long that it no longer weighs anything to lift. Only his hands, careful around the little grey picture, gave him away. Nerina did not move. She had learned to be still for wounded creatures long before she learned to be still for a wounded ledger. "So I made myself into a house with no soft rooms," he said. "I built the name, and the name made the fear, and the fear kept people at the distance where they could not be used against me. For 11 years it worked. And then I stood at a table of old compasses and a woman told me why a widow waits 40 years to sell an astrolabe, and I felt a door open in a house I had bricked up on purpose, and I have been afraid of you since the afternoon I met you. Not of losing you, of them finding the door you made in me." "That is why you sent me away," she said. "I sent you away," he said, "because the only love I have ever known how to keep alive is the kind I hold at arm's length. I do not know how to keep you close and keep you breathing. I have never once seen it done." For a long time, Nerina said nothing. Then she told him her own. "My father never took anything from me the way they took your brother," she said. "He did it slowly, and he called it raising me. Every time I reached for something of my own, he told me I would fail and come crawling back. And he said it so gently and so often that by the time I was grown I could no longer tell his voice from my own thoughts. You will be back. It is the same sentence, Severin. Your enemies taught you that love is a door your killers walk through. My father taught me I am a person who cannot survive on the far side of my own front door. We were both handed a lie about what happens when we choose, and we have both spent our whole lives arranging our houses so that we never have to test it." He looked at her as though she had reached into his chest and named a bone. "The difference," she said, "is that I finally tested mine. I walked out the front door, and I did not come crawling back, and I did not fail. You have not tested yours yet. You still believe the only way to keep me is to lose me on purpose." He did not argue. For the first time in their marriage, he let a thing she had said about him simply stand in the room, unmanaged, and the letting it stand was so unlike him that she understood exactly how far into himself her words had reached. The grey light filled the room. Neither of them said the next thing, because the next thing was too large, and there was a man bleeding at the foot of the stairs and a threat sitting on her pillow, and some doors you can open only one at a time. But when he had gone down to see to the guard, Nerina sat at the table and opened the ledger to the last unread pages, and began, for the final time, to follow the money all the way down to whoever stood at the bottom of it, holding the other end. The days that followed had a strange gentleness to them, the way the air goes soft and still in the hour before a storm. Something had shifted in him after that grey morning. He still came each evening, but he came as a man comes to a place he has decided to stop defending himself inside. He asked her opinion and did not flinch when it differed from his own. He brought no gifts. He learned from Fenna how she took her tea and made it without asking and set it at her elbow, and that small, correct thing undid her more than any case of velvet and brass ever could have. He began to talk to the child too, which she had not expected and would not have believed if she had not heard it. Lo, when he thought she was not listening, a few words to the curve of her belly about nothing at all, the weather, the tide, and the boats coming in past the mole. The clinic had told them, at the last visit, that the child was a girl, and he had a voice for their daughter now that she had never once heard him use on a living soul, and every time she caught it, she had to turn to the window so that he would not see what it did to her. One evening, working, she went very still. "What?" he said, already half out of his chair. "Nothing is wrong," she said. "Here." She took his hand before she could think better of it, and laid it flat against the side of her belly, low, where the small, insistent flutter had come again. "Wait," she said. He waited. The man who had never in his life been good at waiting held his breath and waited. And then it came, the faintest tap against his palm. A thing so small it should not have been able to move a man that size. And she watched it move him anyway. Watched something break open in his face that no enemy had ever reached. "That is our child," he said, as though the fact had only now become real, as though for months it had been a word and had just this instant become a person. "That is our child," she agreed. He did not try to take anything. He did not arrange or decide or protect. He only kept his hand where she had put it and let their child knock against it. And when he looked up at her, his eyes were wet, and she leaned across the small distance that had taken them 2 years and a broken marriage to cross, and she kissed him. He went still, the way he had gone still at the auction house, the way he went still before all the things that mattered to him. His hands stayed at his sides until she took one of them and set it at her waist. Then he kissed her back the way a man drinks water after a long walk in the sun, and the room that had been only hers became, for that hour, theirs, though she noticed even then that he had waited to be asked, and she loved him for the waiting more than she could have loved him for any bolder thing. Later he sat with his back against the bed, and she sat between his knees with his arms loose around her and the ledger forgotten on the table. And neither of them spoke, and it was the first silence in 2 years that had nothing at all held back inside it. This is what it was supposed to be, she thought. She let herself think it for exactly as long as it lasted. She could not sleep afterward. Long after he had gone, with the astrolabe waiting on the high shelf and the picture of their child back between the pages, she lit the lamp and did the thing she had promised herself she would do. She followed the last account all the way down. The Freeport Shell had worn 3 names. The third had paid a lawyer. The lawyer had filed a single dull document with the harbor authority, the kind no one ever reads. And in the small print of that document, listed as the person with beneficial control of the whole quiet machine, was a name she knew. She read it 3 times, because a careful woman does not trust the first reading of a thing she is afraid of. It did not change. It sat on the dull document exactly where the law required it to sit, plain as a price tag. The one truth in the whole affair that no one had thought to hide, because no one had ever imagined the wife would read that far down. It was not a rival family. It was not a stranger. It was the name of the woman who had climbed her stairs in pale gray and told her to remember, when the end came, that she had been warned first. Otavia Sarn had paid Vidal. Otavia Sarn had bought her schedule. Otavia Sarn had carried Severin the warning that made him send his wife away, and then had set about patiently making the warning true. Narina sat in the lamplight with the proof in her hands and understood 2 things at once. That she finally knew who was trying to kill her, and that the one man alive who could stop it had told her that very week that the single name in the world he would never let her look at like a false ledger was the name of the person who had brought him the warning. He had all but told her already. He had drawn a circle around the one truth she needed and asked her gently not to look inside it. She was going to have to make Severin Dracos believe that his oldest ally wanted his wife dead. And she already knew, with the cold certainty of a woman who could read a house, that he was not going to want to. She telephoned him at first light and said only, "Come now and bring Emmerich and no one else, and do not tell anyone at the house where you are going." Something in her voice moved him faster than any argument could have. She had the document ready on the table when he came up the stairs. She did not soften it. She had learned that softening the truth for powerful men only teaches them the truth can be moved. "The person who has been buying your wife," she said, "is Ottavia Sarn." She watched it hit him, and she watched him not want it, exactly as she had known she would. "That is not possible," he said. "Ottavia brought me the warning. She is the reason I knew." "She is the reason you knew," Narina said, "because she is the one holding the knife. She fed you the warning knowing precisely what you would do with it. She has known you longer than I have, Severin. She knew you would send me away. She counted on it." He was already shaking his head, and she understood the shape of the refusal, because it was not stupidity, and it was not even loyalty. It was that to believe her was to accept that the warning which had cost him his marriage had been a hand laid on his oldest fear on purpose, and no one wants to learn he has been played upon like an instrument by someone he trusted with the music. "Emmerich," he began, "get me." He never finished. Down in the shop the bell rang, and then it rang again, wrong, and there was Fenna's voice raised in fury and the heavy slam of the shop door and a man's shout, and Narina knew, with the clarity that never left her, that Ottavia had learned her name, was no longer safe in the world, and had chosen, in the same hour, to end the problem for good. What followed happened in the small distances a person can be dragged across a room. Two men came up the stairs. Emmerich met the first at the top, and they went down together in a struggle she made herself not watch. The second was faster, and he was between her and the door before Severin could close the space, and he had a hand in her hair and an arm across her body, and was turning her toward the window when Severin reached them. She would remember very little of the next part cleanly. Only that Severin did not shout, that the quiet in him was more frightening than any noise, that the man who had promised her he was learning to hold things gently was, for those few seconds, exactly the thing the harbor feared. She had spent 2 years being told she was the soft thing in the hard house. She learned in those few seconds what the hard house had always been for, and she was not sorry, and she would examine that about herself later, on some calmer day, and find that she was still not sorry. And then it was over, and the man was down, and Emmerich was slumped against the wall holding his arm wrong, and Fenna was pounding up the stairs with a boat hook in her hand, and Narina was on her knees by the bed with both arms wrapped around the low curve of her belly, and a pain moving through her that stopped the whole world. "Severin," she said. Her voice did not sound like her own. Something is wrong. He did not decide for her, even then. Even then, in the worst moment of both their lives, he knelt in front of her and said, "Tell me what you need." And she said, "The clinic, Harrow Street. Now." And he carried her down past the wreckage of her safe room and did exactly and only what she had asked. The hours in the clinic were the longest of his life. He was not permitted past a certain door, and for once he did not force it. He stood on the wrong side of it, the most powerful man in the harbor, holding a jar of sea glass that Fenna had pressed into his hands for reasons none of them could have explained, and he waited to be told whether he still had a family. Emmerich sat beside him with his arm freshly set and said nothing, which was the truest kindness the man knew how to offer. Fenna paced. Once she stopped in front of Severin and looked as though she might say a hard thing, and then she looked at his face and did not say it, and only laid her broad hand on his shoulder for a moment, one human being to another, and took it away again. He would remember that afterward longer than he remembered the fight. The child held on. The doctor used the word threatened, and the word rest, and the word fortunate, and she used them kindly. And when at last they let him in, Narina was pale against the pillow with a monitor ticking out a small, fast rhythm beside her, the sound of a heart that had decided, against everything, to keep going. He sat beside the bed and took her hand and did not speak for a long time. "I almost did it again," he said finally. "When I saw his hand on you, everything in me said the same thing it said 2 years ago. Send her away. Send her so far, no hand can ever reach her." He looked at their joined hands. "I have spent my whole life certain that was love. And I sat outside that door for 3 hours tonight and understood that it is only fear wearing love's coat." He had never in his life said a sentence that cost him more, and she heard the whole of what it had taken to arrive at it. And still, exhausted as she was, some old and accurate part of her did not quite believe that saying a thing and being able to live by it were the same, and she was right not to believe it, though it would be morning before she understood why. She was too tired to answer. She pressed his hand. It was enough for that night. It was almost enough. But she felt it in him even then, beneath the tenderness, coiled and waiting, the old instinct he had named and not yet killed. And when she woke near dawn, the chair beside her bed was empty, and Severin stood at the dark window with his telephone in his hand and his back to her, speaking very quietly, arranging something, and she did not have to hear the words to know their shape. He was deciding her safety again, and he had not asked. He had it all arranged by the time the clinic released her. "There is a house," he said, "not in the hills, far from here, across a border, under a name no one has ever heard. Emmerich will take you tonight. You and the child will be safe there, truly safe, in a way you have never been safe with me, and I will end this thing here, alone. And when it is finished." He said it all in the flat, even voice he used for arrangements that had already been made, the voice that did not expect an answer, because the thing was decided. He had chosen the house and the border and the name. He had chosen the car and the hour. He had chosen everything except the one person all the choices were about, and he did not appear to notice that he had left her out of her own escape, because he never had noticed, not once, in all the years of loving her. "When it is finished," she said. "What then?" He did not answer, and his silence was the whole answer, and it was the same silence that had stood in his study 2 years before. "You are not planning to come," she said. "You are planning to send us away and stay behind and finish it, and if you live you will have kept us safe, and if you die you will have kept us safe, and either way you will never once have had to learn the thing your brother's death taught you not to learn." She heard her own voice shaking and did not stop it. "This is go then, Severin. This is go then, you will be safe, wearing a better coat. You have brought me all the way back to the exact room I walked out of. I am trying to keep you alive," he said, and for the first time there was pleading in it. "I know," she said. "That is what makes it unbearable. You are not doing this because you have stopped loving me. You are doing it because you love me, and you still believe those are the same thing. Love and the cage, love and the goodbye. And they are not." She stepped closer. "Do you know what the worst of it is?" she said. "It is that this time I understand you. I have held your brother in the space between your words. I know the 11 days. I know why every soft thing in your life has a wall built around it. And I know you are not cruel, you are frightened, and you have been frightened since you were a boy." She let the tears come and did not wipe them away. "And it changes nothing. Because a cage built out of love is still a cage, and a child raised inside one learns that the people who love her are the ones who take her choices away. I will not do that to her. I would rather raise her poor and unguarded than raise her safe and certain that safe is only another word for silent. You want to face Octavia alone?" she went on, "but you cannot face her at all, because even now you do not truly believe it is her. And you would rather send your wife across a border than look your oldest friend in the eye and see what I have already seen. I am the one holding the proof that ends her, and you would put the proof in a car tonight so that you never have to use it. Give me the car then, she said. But not to the border. I will take what I know to the people in this harbor who have wanted a reason to be rid of Octavia San for 20 years. And I will hand them the ledger, and I will end her without spilling a drop. The only way I have ever wanted to end anything, with the truth set down where it cannot be moved. You taught me this world runs on fear. I have read its books. I know where its fear is kept. You will not, he said, the old command flaring up in him. It is too dangerous. And there it was, one last time. No, she said quietly. She took off nothing this time. There was no ring to leave. It had sat on his black glass table for months because he could neither put it away nor give it back. She simply picked up the folded proof and the little picture of their child and her coat, and she walked to the door of the room she had chosen, and she opened it herself because she could, because it was hers. I have opened this door on my own once before, she said. You told me I would be back. She looked at him. I came back, not because I could not manage without you, because I chose to. And you are about to teach our daughter that when this family is frightened, it stops asking and starts deciding, exactly the way both our fathers taught us. I will not let you. If you cannot stand beside me and be afraid and ask anyway, then stand behind your walls. I am going to go and be brave in the daylight, where you have never once let yourself stand. She waited one heartbeat at the door. Part of her, the oldest part, the part that still spoke in her father's voice, told her that she was throwing away the only safety she would ever be offered, that she would fail, that she would be back, that she had always been going to be back. She listened to it the way you listen to weather through a wall. Then she went. Severin Drakos stood alone in the wrecked room where his wife had just, for the second time, chosen a door over him. On the sill, the jar of sea glass had somehow survived the whole long night unbroken. On the table lay nothing at all, because this time she had taken everything that was hers and left him only the shape of where it had been. Emmerich came up the stairs slowly, his arm bound against his chest, and held out his good hand. In it was a telephone. On the screen was a message he had spent the small hours confirming through every source the two of them still trusted. It was 3 lines long. It named the accounts. It named the lawyer. It named Octavia Sarn. She was right, Emmerich said. She was right about all of it. I know, Severin said. His voice had gone very quiet. She has been right about everything since the morning she left a ring on my table, and I have called it love every single time I refused to listen. Emmerich did not offer comfort. He had none to give, and he respected his employer too much to invent it. He only said, "The harbor already knows she left this room on foot, and Octavia has ears in the harbor." And then he let the sentence finish itself in the silence. "Where she has gone?" he asked at last. "To do the brave thing alone," Severin said, "because I would not do it beside her. And Octavia will know within the hour that the one person who can undo her is walking the harbor unguarded, with the proof in her coat." He thought of the ring on the black glass table, and of the empty table in front of him now, and he understood, at last and completely, that there was only one door left in the whole ruined house of his life that he had never once had the courage to walk through. The one you open by asking. He did not take the guards. He did not keep the car past the first corner. For the first time since the men who owed his father had taught him what he was, Severin Drakos walked out into the open harbor at night as only himself, with nothing between him and the world but the hope that he was not already too late to ask. He found her on the North Quay, walking fast in the cold with her coat wrapped around the proof and the picture of their child, and he did not pull the car alongside and order her into it. He stopped it 100 yards back and got out and walked, and caught up to her on foot the way an ordinary man catches up to his wife, breathing hard, no guards, no arrangement, only himself. "Nerina," he said. She kept walking. You cannot stop me. I'm not here to stop you, he said. I am here to ask if I may come with you. She stopped. She turned. The wind came off the water and pulled at both of them. He stood a careful distance away, close enough to be heard and far enough to be refused. And she realized he had learned at last exactly where that line was. You believe me, she said. About Octavia. I believed you the moment you said it, he said. I only could not bear it, and I have learned tonight that those are not the same, believing a thing and being able to bear it, and that I have spent my life letting the second one decide the first. Emmerich has the confirmation. You were right. You have been right about all of it from the very first folded page. Then get out of my way, she said, or walk beside me. Those are the only two things you are permitted to do. Walk beside you, he said. Tell me how you mean to end her. And then, because he was who he was and always would be, he added, and let me carry nothing but what you hand me. What she did that night, she did with paper exactly as she had promised. There was a room, above a shipping office on the old mole, where the harbor's quiet powers met when they had a thing to decide that no one wished to see decided in daylight. Octavia Sarn had sat in that room for years as Severin's voice and all but his family. Nerina walked into it on her husband's arm, and then let go of his arm and set the ledger on the long table and told them, in the plain, unhurried voice of a woman reading them what a thing truly was, precisely how Octavia had sold one of their own, put a price on the life of a pregnant woman, and gambled every name at that table in a free port account in order to do it. She did not accuse. She appraised. She laid the false lines beside the true ones and let the numbers speak, because numbers, she had told Severin once, do not lie the way people do, and the men around that table had built their whole lives on knowing the difference. One of them, an old man who had known Severin's father and feared his son, drew the ledger toward himself and read the lines in silence for a long minute. And when he looked up, it was not at Severin, but at Nerina, and he inclined his head the smallest amount, the way such men acknowledge a thing they respect and would rather not have been shown. Severin said only one thing in that room. When it was done, when the silence had taken on the particular shape that means a decision has already been reached, he looked at the people who had feared him for 11 years and said, "She is not mine to answer for any more. She answered to you tonight. Do as you see fit." And then he stood behind his wife and let the harbor do the one thing the harbor had always known how to do, which was to close quietly and completely around someone who had betrayed it. Octavia Sarn was gone from the harbor by the end of the week. No shot was fired. Nerina had undone her with nothing but the truth, laid out plainly and left where no hand could move it. Vidal was gone the same night, out the east gate he had sold, and it did not open for him again. Afterward, in the gray quiet that comes when a long danger finally lifts, they stood again in the room above the chandlery, which Fenna had already begun to set right, muttering the whole while about the state in which men left things. Severin did not sit. He stood near the door, at the threshold, in the place he had taught himself to wait. "I'm not going to ask you to come back to the house," he said. "I am not going to arrange your life, or fill your jar, or decide what you can survive. I have been trying, the whole way here, to think of the thing a man says at the end of a night like this, and everything I reached for was a thing I wanted to give you, and I have finally understood that you do not want to be given anything. So I am only going to tell you what is true, and then I am going to let you choose, and I am going to be able to bear it whichever way you choose. That is the part I could never do before. I can do it now. I learned it from you." He took something from his coat. It was not a case of velvet and brass. It was her ring, the one that had waited on his table since the morning she left, because he had never been able to put it away and had never been willing to give it back. He set it down on her table, gently, and stepped back from it, all the way back to the door. "This is yours," he said. "It was always yours. I am not putting it on your hand because I put it there once believing it made you mine, and I was wrong about what it was for. It is not a leash, and it is not a door I am allowed to lock. It is only a thing you may pick up if you want it, on the day you want it, and never if you do not. I will love you exactly the same either way. That is the whole of what I have to offer. I should have offered it 2 years ago, instead of a study and a sentence. Narina looked at the ring on her own table, in her own room, with her own door standing open behind the man who had finally learned to wait inside it. Then she crossed the room. She did not pick up the ring, not yet. She took his face in both her hands first, the man from before the name, and she kissed him, and she felt him go still and then choose, deliberately, not to stay still, to hold her the way you hold a thing you have decided at last to stop being afraid of. I love you, he said against her hair. I loved you across a table of compasses before I knew it was dangerous. I loved you when I sent you away, and I did it so badly that it looked like the opposite. I love the way you read a lie. I love that you would not take the astrolabe. I love that you opened your own door twice and came back only when it was yours to come back to. I love you too, she said. And then, because she was who she was, and because it mattered that it be true and not only kind, she added, I am not certain we will be easy. I have never wanted easy, he said. I had easy. Easy as a house with no soft rooms. I would rather be afraid in a room with you in it. She picked up the ring. She put it on her own hand herself, which was the only way she was ever going to wear it again. And he watched her do it and did not reach to help. And that, more than the vows had ever been, was the marriage. Fenna, who had been listening shamelessly from the stairwell the entire time, chose that moment to come up with tea for two and a face that dared either of them to remark on the redness of her eyes. She set the tray down, looked at the ring on Narina's hand, looked at the man standing at a careful distance from his own wife, and said only, Well, about time one of you learned some manners. And she went back down. The jar filled that spring. She did not tell him when the last piece went in. He came up the stairs one evening, gave the 2 knuckle knock, waited to be asked, and found her holding the jar in both hands, full at last, green and white, and 3 pieces of the rare soft blue. Take the astrolabe down, she said. He did. She did not open her shop with a thing he had bought her. She opened it with the jar she had filled herself, and the savings she had counted coin by coin, and a small written loan from her husband, so hedged with conditions that he said signing it was the most insulted he had been in his life. Over the door she hung a plain board with 1 word on it, which was her own name, and beneath it, in the window, the first object she ever set on display, not for sale, was the astrolabe from the 3rd case. Because a thing can begin as a gift refused and become, in time, a thing you choose to keep. People came. They brought her the contents of attics and the estates of the dead, the brooches and clocks and small brown paintings that families could neither bring themselves to value nor to discard. And she told them the truth of each one, gently, and they trusted her the way people trust someone who has clearly been trusted with harder things. Her father wrote to her once that first year. The letter said, among other things, that he supposed she would be wanting help now that she had bitten off more than she could chew. She read it twice, the way she read everything, and then she did a thing she could not have done 3 years before. She put it in a drawer, and she did not answer it, and it did not run her days. The child came in the summer, in the clinic on Harrow Street, and it was a girl, and she was loud, and Fenna wept and pretended it was the heat. Severin held his daughter in 2 hands that had done a great many things the harbour still whispered about, and he was, for once, completely without instruction and completely unafraid, because the thing he had spent his whole life protecting people from was fear itself, and he had finally set it down. He still led men who lowered their voices around his name. He still closed the study door. But he came to the room above the chandlery and later to the small house they took together by the water, on her terms, written down, and when he forgot himself and began to arrange something without asking, she had only to look at him, and he would stop and ask and wait. And on the cold evenings when the day was done, it was Severin who stood at her door with his coat still on, and Severin who said, "Should I go?" and Nerina who decided. Once, long ago, the most feared man in the harbor had told his pregnant wife that she would be back by morning, and by morning her ring had been on the table, and he had believed, right up until the moment she was gone, that the whole world came back, in the end, to Severin Dracos. He had been right, though not in the way he had meant it. She did come back. But she came back the way the sea returns a piece of glass to the shore, on her own tide, in her own time, with every sharp edge she had ever been handed worn smooth and made her own. And she came back only because, at the very last, he had learned to leave the door open and let her. Go then, she told him now, on the nights he rose to leave. It was not a wound anymore. It was not a test. It was a door. And every time he chose to stay, and every time it was because she had asked him to.